Melissa Granger was a beloved teacher, a devoted mother, and the last person anyone in Eldridge Falls expected to die violently in her own home. Travis Elwood was a quiet former student with a troubled past, forgotten by most, until evidence in her murder pointed straight to him. But as investigators dug deeper into Melissa's final days, they uncovered a message she never meant for anyone to see. One that changed everything. What began as a straightforward case of obsession turned, deadly soon unraveled into a mystery darker and more twisted than anyone imagined. Eldridge Falls was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. Nestled in a quiet valley with tree-lined streets and porch lights that flickered on at dusk, it seemed almost untouched by the chaos of the outside world. Crime was nearly unheard of. The biggest headlines in the local newspaper were usually about school bake sales or new benches at the park. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted to raise children in peace. That peace shattered on the morning of July 8, 2017. Melissa Granger had lived in Eldridge Falls for over a decade. At 39 years old, she was known as a kind-hearted schoolteacher, a single mother, and someone who always found time to help others. Her 2 children were away at summer camp that week, and she had been looking forward to some quiet time at home. But when her neighbor stopped by to return a dish early that morning and got no response, something didn't feel right. The porch light was still on from the night before. The curtains were drawn. The house was too still. The neighbor used the spare key Melissa had left with her for emergencies. What she found inside would haunt her forever. Melissa was lying on the living room floor. She wasn't moving. There were no visible signs of trauma, no blood, no broken glass. But it was immediately clear that something terrible had happened. The police were called within minutes. When officers arrived, they found the front door locked from the inside and no evidence of a break-in. Nothing appeared to have been stolen. Her purse was still on the kitchen table and her keys were in the dish by the door. At first glance, it didn't even look like a crime scene. But Melissa's lifeless body told another story. The medical examiner later confirmed that she had been strangled. There were faint marks on her neck, just enough to reveal that someone had used their bare hands to kill her. Detectives began their investigation by looking into the people closest to her. Her ex-husband was questioned, and although they had a history of disagreements, he had a solid alibi supported by traffic cameras and receipts. He had been more than 200 miles away when Melissa died. Friends and neighbors were interviewed. No one had seen or heard anything unusual the night before. What confused investigators most was how calm the house looked. There was no sign of a struggle. The couch pillows were still perfectly in place. Her favorite mug sat clean in the sink. It was as if someone had slipped in and out without leaving a trace. But how? The doors were locked. There were no fingerprints that didn't belong. Rumors began to swirl throughout the town. Some said it had to be someone she knew. Others whispered about a possible stalker. But there was no proof of either. The town that had always felt so safe was suddenly cloaked in fear. If someone like Melissa Granger could be murdered in her own home without a single clue left behind, then maybe Eldridge Falls wasn't so safe after all. As the investigation into Melissa Granger's death deepened, detectives found themselves without a clear path forward. With no signs of forced entry, no obvious motive, and nothing stolen, the case was as puzzling as it was chilling. The residents of Eldridge Falls had gone from feeling invincible in their quiet town to suddenly checking their locks twice at night. But it wasn't just the lack of evidence that made the case difficult. It was the small, haunting clues that seemed to point in every direction and nowhere at once. Melissa's autopsy confirmed what investigators had suspected. She had been strangled manually, meaning her killer was close enough to use their hands. This was personal. The medical examiner estimated the time of death between 10:30 p.m. and midnight on July 7th. That placed it just a couple of hours after Melissa had returned from a neighborhood barbecue, where several people had seen her laughing and relaxed. Nothing in her behavior that evening suggested fear or distress. As detectives reviewed her last known interactions, one of her colleagues from school came forward with an unsettling detail. 2 weeks before her death, Melissa had mentioned feeling like someone was following her. She said she had seen the same unfamiliar car parked near her house on multiple occasions, and had even thought she heard footsteps outside her window one night. At the time, she dismissed it as paranoia and didn't report it to the police. Her co-worker assumed it was just stress from being alone while her kids were away. But now, that seemingly minor comment took on a whole new weight. Investigators combed through security footage from nearby homes, hoping to spot any unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious activity. Most footage was grainy or incomplete. A few cameras showed Melissa walking into her house that night, alone, just after 9:45 p.m. But after that, nothing. No one was seen entering or leaving. It was as if the killer had simply vanished, or had never been caught on camera at all. Friends told detectives that Melissa had not been seeing anyone seriously. She was focused on her children and her work. Her ex-husband, though initially a person of interest, had been ruled out. The clean crime scene continued to be a major obstacle. Even the usual forensic tools weren't offering much help. There were no foreign fingerprints, no shoe prints, and no DNA found that didn't belong to Melissa or her children. But something else was missing, something important. When her house was inventoried, it was discovered that her phone and laptop were gone. These weren't items a random burglar would take while ignoring jewelry and cash. They were specific, personal, purposeful. Whoever took them likely knew what they were looking for. That realization sent a ripple of dread through the investigative team. They now believed the killer might not have come for money or revenge, but for secrets. Whatever was on those devices could be the key to unlocking Melissa's murder. But without them, the truth was still out of reach. And in a town like Eldridge Falls, the unknown was beginning to feel more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. Weeks passed with no major breakthroughs, and frustration began to settle over the investigation like a heavy fog. Detectives kept returning to the same question: who would want Melissa Granger dead, and why? Her missing phone and laptop remained their most promising lead. It was clear now that the killer had taken them deliberately. They weren't just random items stolen in panic. They were carefully chosen. Investigators believed they contained information someone wanted to erase. Digital forensics teams began the painstaking process of searching Melissa's cloud backups, hoping to recover anything that might have been stored automatically. At first, everything looked normal. Family photos, lesson plans, harmless text messages. But then they discovered a deleted folder, one that had been wiped just days before her death. After restoring the data, they uncovered a chilling trail of conversations. Melissa had been communicating with someone through an encrypted messaging app, one she hadn't used with any of her known contacts. The conversation started casually enough, light banter, friendly exchanges, but soon shifted in tone. The messages became more intense, bordering on obsessive. Melissa had expressed discomfort several times, even asking the person to stop contacting her. The final message she sent read, "Stop coming to my house." That message had been deleted from her phone, but was preserved in the cloud archive. The app had hidden the sender's identity, but forensic specialists began digging into the metadata, IP logs, and device IDs. After days of tracking virtual breadcrumbs, they finally got a hit. The messages were traced back to a burner phone purchased at a gas station 2 towns over. Surveillance footage from the store showed a young man in a hoodie paying with cash. Using facial recognition, authorities identified him as 24-year-old Travis Elwood. Travis was a former student of Melissa's from nearly a decade earlier. At the time, he had been quiet, socially withdrawn, and struggled in school. No one had heard much from him since he graduated. His name hadn't come up once during the initial investigation, but now he was suddenly at the center of it. Detectives obtained a warrant and searched Travis's small apartment. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Hidden beneath his bed in a locked box were Melissa's missing laptop and phone. Both had been wiped clean, but recovery software showed traces of the same encrypted app. On a notepad next to his computer, they found pages filled with writings about Melissa, some affectionate, others disturbing. He had drawn pictures of her, written imagined conversations, and even referred to her as the only one who saw me. The evidence was overwhelming. Travis was arrested and charged with murder. In the eyes of the public and the investigators, the case had finally been cracked. But while the town of Eldridge Falls began to exhale after weeks of tension, a few detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. The evidence was solid. The motive seemed clear. And yet, one question lingered in the background. If Travis was the killer, why didn't Melissa ever mention his name? Travis Elwood's arrest was a turning point in the case, and for a moment it felt like everything had finally made sense. The evidence pointed directly at him. Melissa's phone and laptop were found in his apartment. He had been messaging her using an encrypted app, and his personal writings revealed an unhealthy obsession. News of the arrest spread quickly across Eldridge Falls. People were relieved, even shocked, that the killer had been someone from within their own community, a former student. Quiet, unnoticed. During questioning, Travis remained mostly calm. He admitted to having a relationship with Melissa, but claimed it was consensual and secret. According to him, they had reconnected years after high school and had been seeing each other discreetly. He said Melissa had asked him to keep their relationship hidden because of her job and her children. He insisted he hadn't killed her, that they had fought that night, but she was alive when he left. His version of events painted him not as a killer, but as a heartbroken man caught in a tragic misunderstanding. Investigators were skeptical. They couldn't find any evidence that supported the idea of a relationship. None of Melissa's friends or family knew about Travis. There were no romantic photos, no emails, no gifts exchanged. The only record of contact was the string of messages that had grown increasingly aggressive. The tone of those messages didn't suggest love or affection. They suggested obsession and control. One of the final messages from Travis read, "If you won't be with me, I'll make sure no one else can." Prosecutors moved forward with the case. In court, Travis's defense team stuck to the narrative of a secret relationship turned tragic. They argued that Melissa's death had been accidental, the result of a heated argument gone wrong. They claimed she had fallen and hit her head after pushing him away. But the autopsy was clear. Melissa had been strangled. There were no signs of blunt force trauma, no indication of an accidental fall. The marks on her neck and the lack of defensive wounds pointed to a swift, deliberate act. The prosecution presented the digital evidence, the handwritten notes, and the fact that Travis had attempted to erase Melissa's devices. They argued that he had stalked her, grown increasingly frustrated by her rejection, and ultimately murdered her in a fit of rage. The jury took less than 2 days to deliberate. Travis was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. the town of Eldridge Falls could finally breathe again. Melissa's family had justice. Her students and colleagues mourned her loss, but took comfort in knowing the person responsible had been held accountable. Still, some members of the investigative team remained uneasy. There were small details that didn't quite fit, tiny, overlooked inconsistencies that nagged at the back of their minds. They had their conviction. The case was officially closed. But for a few who had followed every step of the investigation, there was a quiet, persistent doubt. What if Travis Elwood hadn't acted alone? Or worse, what if he wasn't the killer at all? Months passed after the trial, and life in Eldridge Falls slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The case had left a scar on the town, but with Travis Elwood behind bars, most people believed the nightmare was over. Melissa Granger's family tried to heal. Her children returned to school. Her colleagues dedicated a memorial garden in her honor. Closure, it seemed, had finally come. But for the detectives who had worked the case, a few lingering questions never fully disappeared. Something about the story still felt incomplete. It was a junior forensic analyst going through archived data for training purposes who noticed the anomaly. While reviewing the cloud backups of Melissa's devices, she found a file that hadn't been included in the court evidence. It was a draft message, unsent and saved automatically, just hours before Melissa's death. The message read, "If anything happens to me, it's not Travis. It's someone else." The analyst flagged the discovery immediately. Investigators were stunned. They had built an airtight case around Travis, but this message raised serious doubts. Why would Melissa name someone else just before she died? Why hadn't this message come up during the original investigation? A deeper look revealed that it had been created during a temporary glitch in the cloud sync system, causing it to be filed in a separate backup folder, one that had gone unnoticed. The message was brief and vague. It gave no name, no details, just a cryptic warning that pointed away from the man already convicted. Investigators reopened the case files, combing through the timeline once again. They reviewed phone records, witness statements, and every scrap of digital data, and slowly, a troubling pattern began to emerge. 3 weeks before her death, Melissa had received several calls from an unlisted number. Each one lasted less than a minute. The number couldn't be traced to Travis. It had belonged to a disposable phone that was later deactivated. The call logs showed that the phone had also been used near the school where Melissa taught, and near the barbecue she attended the night she died. Another clue surfaced from the surveillance footage. One video, previously dismissed due to poor quality, showed a shadowy figure moving across Melissa's backyard shortly after 11 p.m. The footage had been too dark to make out a face, but enhancements now suggested the person was taller and broader than Travis. Investigators quietly reopened an internal inquiry, unsure of what they would find. Was it possible someone else had orchestrated the crime? Was Travis involved, but not acting alone? Or had they completely misread the situation from the beginning? Despite these questions, no new suspect emerged. The message remained the only piece of evidence suggesting another party. Melissa's words, written in fear possibly moments before her death, couldn't be ignored. But with no name and no solid leads, the case remained officially closed. Eldridge Falls had its conviction, but under the surface, doubt lingered. In the end, Melissa Granger's final unsent message cast a long, unsettling shadow, one that left investigators wondering if the truth had slipped through their fingers after all.